The night my own family tried to throw me out of the house I paid for with every dollar I had, they thought I would break down, cry, and leave quietly. But they did not know one thing. For years I had been saving every receipt, every bank statement, every signed paper, every single document. And when they stood in front of me with angry faces and cruel words, I opened one folder and changed everything. My name is Claire, and this is the story of the home I built, the betrayal I survived, and the truth that finally set me free. I still remember the day I bought that house. It was not a big mansion. It was not some fancy place with marble floors and giant chandeliers. It was just a warm little home in a quiet neighborhood with a front porch, a small kitchen, and enough space for hope. But to me, it felt like a palace. Because that house was not just walls and windows. It was years of sacrifice. It was my second job. It was skipped dinners, tired mornings, and nights where I sat alone and counted every dollar. It was me telling myself over and over again, Claire, one day this will be yours. I had worked so hard for that moment. I had taken extra shifts, said no to vacations, said no to new clothes, said no to everything that was not necessary. Friends would invite me out, and I would smile and say I was busy. Truth was, I was always busy. Busy saving, busy dreaming, busy building a life where I would never have to beg anyone for a roof over my head. And when I finally signed the papers, when the seller handed me the keys, I stood there in the empty living room and cried. I cried because it was mine. My name was on the deed. My money bought it. My future lived there. I remember holding those keys so tightly that my hand hurt. I remember whispering, I did it. No one saw that moment. No one saw the late nights, the stress, the fear, the sacrifices. They only saw that I had a house. And in my family, that should have been something to celebrate. But some people do not look at your blessing and feel happy for you. They look at it and start counting how to take it away. At first, my family acted proud. They came over with fake smiles and loud voices. My aunt touched the walls like she was blessing them. My cousins walked through the rooms and talked about how beautiful everything looked. My brother stood in the doorway and said, Claire, you really made it. And my mother smiled in that way that made me feel safe. Or at least, that is what I thought. They were all so warm in the beginning. Too warm. The kind of warm that hides something cold underneath. Soon after I moved in, the real story started showing itself. My family began visiting more often, then staying longer, then acting like the house was not mine, but ours. My brother started leaving his shoes by the front door. My aunt started giving instructions about where things should go. My cousin moved furniture without asking, and every time I tried to speak up, they made me feel guilty. Claire, family helps family. Why are you being so sensitive? It is just a house. Just a house. That phrase hurt more than they knew, because to them, it was just a house. To me, it was every dream I had ever worked for. But I stayed quiet. I kept peace. I told myself maybe I was being too emotional. Maybe they were just adjusting. Maybe this was what family did. Then came the money. That was where everything began to change. One of my relatives said it would be better for everyone if I paid certain monthly costs as a kind of shared family arrangement. They called it rent, but it was not real rent. It was a pressure payment. A way to keep me paying and obedient while they acted like they were doing me a favor by letting me live in my own home. Can you imagine that? Paying money every month for the house you already bought. Still, I did it. Because I wanted peace. Because I wanted to avoid arguments. Because I thought if I stayed kind, they would stay kind too. I was wrong. Year after year, I kept paying. Sometimes I would look at my bank account and feel sick. I had spent so much of my savings buying the house, and now I was still giving money just to keep everyone calm. I paid for repairs. I paid for utilities. I paid for the things they said were for the family. I paid and paid and paid. And while I paid, they slowly built a story around me. A story that made me sound ungrateful. A story that made me sound unstable. A story that made it easier for them to take what was mine. People in the neighborhood started hearing little things. My family would talk. Not directly. Never directly. They would smile in public and poison my name in private. They would say things like, Claire is emotional. Claire does not know how to manage money. Claire needs support. Claire would be lost without us. I did not know it then, but they were preparing. They were building a case against me in the background of everyday life, and I was too busy trying to keep my head above water to notice how deep the water had gotten. Then, one evening, I came home and saw a paper on the kitchen table. It was a notice. Not a conversation, not a warning, a notice. They were telling me to leave. My own family had gathered together and decided I should no longer live in the house I had bought with my own money. I remember standing there, staring at the paper, feeling my heart pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. My brother folded his arms and said, "We gave you enough time." I looked at him and said, "This is my house." He laughed. He actually laughed. Then my aunt said, "Claire, do not make this harder than it needs to be." My mother looked away. That hurt the most, because I could accept anger from enemies. I could accept greed from selfish people, but silence from my mother felt like a knife. I asked them again, very calmly, "How can you tell me to leave my own home?" My cousin answered before anyone else could, "Because the family agreed this is no longer working." The family agreed. Like I was not family. Like I was not the person who sacrificed everything for that roof. Like I was not the name on the property documents sitting in the county records where I had filed them years ago. They thought I was weak. They thought I would panic. They thought I had no power. But they made one very dangerous mistake. They forgot that I had spent years keeping records. I had every bank transfer, every purchase receipt, every tax document, every closing paper, every title record, every update from the county office, every letter, every payment history, everything. I had not just bought a house. I had built a legal wall around it. That night, I did not shout. I did not cry. I did not beg. I stood there very still and said, "Give me one day." My brother scoffed. "For what?" I looked at them all and said, "For me to make a few calls." They did not take me seriously. Why would they? They had spent so long convincing themselves that I was the soft one, the quiet one, the one who always backed down. So they agreed. One day, they thought it would be enough time for me to accept defeat. But that one day was the day I remembered who I was. The next morning, I went to my file cabinet and pulled out everything. The purchase agreement, the deed, the mortgage records which had already been fully paid, the closing statement, the county property registration, the insurance documents, the utility records in my name, the bank statements showing every payment, and one very important letter from the attorney who helped with the transfer and verification when I first bought the place. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, going through every page. The more I looked, the calmer I felt, because truth has a strange power. When you hold the truth in your hands, fear starts to shrink. I called the county office. I called the attorney. I called the bank. I asked for certified copies. I asked for confirmation. I asked for everything in writing. And by the end of that day, I had a folder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. That evening, my family came back to the house like they owned the place. My brother was carrying boxes. My aunt had a smug look on her face. My cousin was already talking about where my things should be moved. They truly believed I was leaving. They had no idea I was waiting for them. When they walked in, I was sitting at the dining table with one folder in front of me. My brother stopped and said, "What is that?" I looked at him and said, "Your mistake." He frowned. "Excuse me?" I opened the folder slowly, very slowly. Not because I was scared, because I wanted them to feel every second of it. I took out the deed first, then the county registration, then the signed proof that the property was in my name, then the payment records, then the attorney's letter, then the tax history, then the certified copies. I placed each document on the table one by one. No yelling, no shaking hands, no tears, just paper. Powerful paper. My cousin leaned over and tried to read the top page. My aunt's face changed first, then my brother's, then my mother's. Because suddenly, the room was quiet. So quiet that I could hear the ceiling fan spinning above us. I looked up and said, "This house is not your decision. It is not your family vote. It is not your opinion. It is legally mine." My brother's face went red. "That is impossible." I said, "No. What is impossible is how comfortable you all became trying to throw me out of my own home." My aunt pointed at the papers. "Those could be fake." I almost smiled. Almost, because they always say that when they are losing. So I pulled out the certified copies, stamped, dated, verified. And I said, "Fake?" Then I held up the letter from the attorney. "Call the office. Ask them yourself." No one spoke. The confidence they came in with was leaving their bodies in real time. My mother finally whispered, "Claire, we thought—" I cut her off gently. "You thought I had nothing. You thought I would stay quiet. You thought if you pushed long enough, I would disappear." Her eyes filled with tears. But I did not rush to comfort her. Not this time. I had spent too many years comforting people who hurt me. My brother shoved the chair back and stood up fast. "You planned this?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, I protected myself." That hit him harder than shouting ever could have, because that is what they never understand. Self-protection is not cruelty. It is survival. My cousin looked confused, almost afraid now. He asked, "Why did you let this go on for so long?" I took a breath and answered honestly. "Because I loved you. Because I wanted this family to work. Because I hoped one day you would remember I was not your enemy." That answer made the room even heavier. No one had anything clever to say after that. Because the truth was standing right there in front of them. I had been the one keeping the peace while they were planning my exit. I had been the one paying, sacrificing, and carrying the load while they were deciding how to take more. And when they realized the house was legally mine, the whole game collapsed. My aunt tried to change the subject. She said, "We were only trying to help." I turned to her and said, "Helping does not look like eviction." My brother muttered, "This is still a family house." I looked at him and said, "Then why is every document in my name?" That question ended the argument, because there was no answer, not one that could survive the truth. They had no legal right, no ownership, no claim, nothing. All they had was arrogance. And arrogance does not stand up well against legal documents. I watched them sit there, with their faces changing from angry to embarrassed to afraid. That was the moment I understood something important. People who take from you often do not expect you to know how to fight back. They depend on your silence. They depend on your kindness. They depend on you being too tired, too guilty, or too loving to protect yourself. But when you finally choose yourself, they have nothing left. My brother tried one last time. He said, "You are really going to do this to family?" I looked at him and said, "No, you already did it to me." That was the line that ended everything. No one answered. Not my mother, not my aunt, not my cousin. No one. And in that silence, I knew they understood. I was not leaving. Not because I was being stubborn. Not because I wanted revenge. But because this was my home. Built from my work. Protected by my name. Locked in by law. I stood up, placed my hand on the folder and said, "You all need to leave now." My brother opened his mouth, but then stopped. Because for the first time, he could see I was not bluffing. I had already spoken to the attorney. I had already verified the records. And if they tried to force me out, the next call would be to the police. My aunt gathered her bag first, then my cousin, then my mother. My brother stayed a few seconds longer, staring at me like he had never really seen me before. Maybe he had not. Maybe all those years he only saw what he wanted to see. Finally, he said in a low voice, "You really outplayed us." I shook my head. "No, I just stopped letting you play me." He walked out without another word, and then the house became quiet again. But this time, it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of peace returning. I sat down in the same chair where I had been attacked just minutes before. I looked at the papers on the table, and for the first time in years, I felt safe inside my own home. Not lucky, not relieved. Safe. And that safety meant more to me than victory. Because this was never only about a house. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to let people rewrite your life. It was about understanding that love without respect is not love at all. It is control. And control will always try to call itself family when it is exposed. The next morning, I did something I had not done in a long time. I made coffee in my own kitchen. I opened the windows. I let the sunlight come in. And I walked through every room like someone who had survived a storm and was finally seeing the sky again. I did not decorate the house that day. I did not celebrate loudly. I just stood there breathing. Because sometimes the strongest victory is not loud. Sometimes it is simply staying. Sometimes it is holding your ground when everyone expects you to fold. Sometimes it is looking at the people who underestimated you and proving, without raising your voice, that you were never powerless. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. People talked. Some were shocked. Some were embarrassed. A few even tried to act like they had always known I was the rightful owner. That made me laugh. Just a little. Because people always admire strength after it wins. But they rarely support it while it is growing in silence. My family never came back to challenge me. Not after the attorney contacted them. Not after the legal notices were clarified. Not after they realized every single claim they had made could not survive one honest look at the records. And that was enough for me. I did not need to punish them. I did not need to destroy them. I only needed to protect what was mine. That was the real lesson of my story. Not that revenge is sweet. Not that humiliation is satisfying. But that truth, when backed by evidence, is stronger than any lie a family can build together. So now, when I walk through my front door, I do it with my head held high. When I hear the floorboards creak, I do not feel fear. When I sit in the living room at night, I do not wonder who will try to take my peace away. Because this house is mine. Not emotionally, not symbolically, legally. And there is power in that word. Mine. I think about the younger version of myself sometimes. The girl who worked too hard. The girl who trusted too easily. The girl who believed love always meant sacrifice. I wish I could sit beside her and say, "Claire, one day you will learn that being kind does not mean being blind, and loving your family does not mean letting them erase you." That is what I learned. And that is what I want every person listening to this story to remember. If you have built something with your sweat, your sacrifice, and your soul, never let anyone convince you that you do not deserve it. Keep the papers. Keep the receipts. Keep the truth. Because one day, when the people around you smile too hard and push too far, Those papers may become your shield. The first week after that night felt strange. Not loud, not dramatic, just strange. Because for the first time in years, nobody was telling me what to do inside my own home. No one was slamming cabinets. No one was walking through my rooms like they belonged there. No one was making little comments with smiling faces and sharp words underneath them. I should have felt free right away. But freedom is not always loud happiness. Sometimes it feels like silence after a war. Sometimes it feels like your body is still waiting for the next attack, even when the attack is already over. That was me. I would wake up early and sit at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the same walls I had once painted myself, and I would ask one question again and again. How did it get this far? How did the people I loved most become the people who hurt me the most? I had no easy answer. Maybe greed changes people. Maybe entitlement does too. Or maybe some people only stay kind as long as they think they are winning. I do not know. What I do know is that after they left, the house felt different. Lighter, but also lonely. Because even though they had betrayed me, they had also been part of my life for so long that their absence felt like a wound that had not decided whether it was healing or hurting. I started checking every lock before bed. I started saving every new message. I started keeping copies of every legal paper in 2 different places. I had learned my lesson the hard way. Trust was not something I could afford to hand out carelessly anymore. A few days later, my attorney called me. He had a calm voice, the kind that makes you breathe easier even before he says the words. He told me everything was now fully documented. The title history was clear. The property records were clear. The payment history was clear. There was no legal claim they could stand on. He also told me something I had not expected. He said, "Claire, they were hoping you would panic and leave before checking the records. That happens more often than people think." I sat there holding the phone and said, "So they really believed I would just disappear?" He answered, "Yes, they were counting on intimidation." That word stayed with me. Intimidation. That was what they had been doing all along. Not love, not family support. Intimidation, wearing the mask of concern. I hung up and sat in the quiet for a long time. Then I opened the folder again and looked at the documents, one by one. The deed, the registration, the tax records, the bank statements, the closing papers. Each page reminded me of something important. This had never been given to me. I had earned it, and that made all the difference. A few days after that, I got a message from my mother. It was short, too short. She wrote, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. I did not reply right away. Because some messages do not ask for conversation. They ask for access. And I was no longer giving access to anyone without thinking. Finally, I answered and said she could come by in the afternoon. Only her. No one else. No brother. No aunt. No cousin. Just her. When she arrived, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just emotionally. Like all the confidence she had worn that night had fallen apart once the truth was exposed. She stood at the door for a second before stepping inside, and I could see she was nervous. That alone told me something. People are only nervous when they know they were wrong. She sat on the sofa. I stayed standing for a moment. I did not want to sit too quickly and make it easy for old patterns to return. My mother looked around the living room and said softly, "It looks nice in here." I gave a small nod. Then silence came again. Heavy silence. The kind that fills the room when both people know the conversation is not really about the weather or the furniture or the walls. She finally said, "Claire, I need you to understand something." I looked at her and waited. She continued, "Your brother was angry. Everyone was under stress. Nobody wanted to hurt you." I let that settle for a second. Then I asked, very calmly. "Mom, do you hear how that sounds?" She blinked. I said, "Nobody wanted to hurt me, but they brought papers to throw me out of my own house. Nobody wanted to hurt me, but they talked about me behind my back. Nobody wanted to hurt me, but they tried to make me leave something I paid for with my own money." Her eyes lowered. I could tell she wanted to defend them again, but she knew she could not. Not with the documents sitting in my drawer. Not after everything had been exposed. She whispered, "I thought you would always find a way to handle it." That one hurt, because that was exactly what every family like mine counts on. They assume the quiet one will carry the burden forever. They assume the strong one will always absorb the damage. They assume love means you will keep returning no matter how badly they treat you. I looked at her and said, "That is the problem. You all thought I would handle everything, but no one thought to protect me." Her hands folded together tightly in her lap. For a moment she looked like she might cry, but I did not rush to save her from that feeling. I had spent too many years being the only one who had to stay calm. She asked, "What do you want from us now?" I answered honestly, "I want distance. I want respect. And I want nobody near this house unless I invite them." She nodded slowly. Then she asked, "Can we ever go back?" I shook my head. "No, not to the way it was." She closed her eyes for a moment. That was when I realized something important. She was grieving too. Not because she had been innocent. She had not been. But because the family story she had helped build had collapsed. And once the lies fall apart, people are forced to see themselves clearly. That is not an easy thing. She left after that without arguing. And for the first time, I felt like she had actually heard me. Not accepted. Not apologized in a perfect way. But heard me. That was enough for that day. Weeks passed. Then months. I slowly got used to the peace. I learned how to sleep without listening for footsteps. I learned how to drink my morning coffee without expecting bad news. I learned how to sit in the living room and enjoy the sunlight, instead of scanning the room for tension. I also learned that healing is not a straight road. Some days I felt strong. Some days I felt angry. Some days I felt sad for no clear reason. Just sad that it had all happened at all. I would stand in the hallway and remember the night they tried to force me out. I would remember my brother's face, my aunt's voice, my mother looking away. And every time those memories came back, I had to remind myself of the ending. They did not win. I did not lose the house. I did not lose my dignity. I did not lose myself. That was the truth I had to keep close. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch when my neighbor, Mrs. Carter, walked by. She was one of the few people who had always been kind without asking for anything in return. She stopped and smiled at me. "Claire," she said, "I heard things got messy a while back." I smiled a little. They did. She sat down for a moment on the chair beside me and said, "You handled it with more grace than most people would." That made me pause. Because grace was not the word I had used for myself. I had called it survival. But maybe they were the same thing sometimes. Maybe grace is just surviving without becoming cruel. Maybe grace is holding your ground without losing your heart. I thanked her quietly. She touched my hand and said, "Never let anyone make you doubt what you built." That stayed with me. Because for months, my family had tried to make me feel like I was only living in borrowed space, like my own life was some kind of misunderstanding. But I was done misunderstanding my own worth. Soon after that, I did something I had postponed for years. I changed the house little by little to make it mine in a deeper way. Not because it had not already been mine legally. It had, but because I wanted the space to reflect the woman I had become. I painted the bedroom a softer color. I bought a new lamp for the reading corner. I framed one of my favorite old photos. I placed fresh flowers near the window. Each small change felt like a sentence being rewritten. Not the family's version. Mine. I also set up a new filing system. That might sound simple, but to me it felt powerful. Everything now had a place. The deed, the insurance, the tax papers, the bank documents, the attorney's contact information. I even kept a backup copy off-site. Because once you learn how quickly people can twist a story, you stop assuming memory is enough. You keep proof. Always. One evening, as I was organizing the last folder, I found an old receipt from the day I first moved in. It was tiny and folded at the edges. I held it in my hand and sat down at the table. For a moment, I could see that younger version of myself again. The one standing in the empty house, smiling with tears in her eyes. The one who believed the hard part was over when she got the keys. I wish I could tell her the truth. I wish I could say, Claire, getting the house is not the same as keeping it. Because the world does not always respect your sacrifice. Sometimes it challenges it. Sometimes it tests it. Sometimes it tries to steal it from you. But if you are steady enough, smart enough, and brave enough, you can hold on. That is what I did. I held on. And not just to the home. I held on to the part of myself that knew I was worthy of it. That was the greatest victory. Not making my family look foolish. Not proving them wrong. Not even winning the legal fight. The greatest victory was refusing to let betrayal teach me that I was small. I was not small. I had simply been generous. There is a difference. Generous people can be taken advantage of. That does not mean they are weak. It means they care. It means they trust. It means they believe in something better. But generosity without boundaries becomes a wound. And I had finally learned to draw a line. So if you are listening to this, and you have ever been made to feel guilty for protecting what is yours, hear me clearly. You are not cruel for keeping your papers. You are not selfish for checking the facts. You are not heartless for refusing to be pushed out of your own life. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand still and say, no more. That was my moment. That was my line. No more. No more lies. No more pressure. No more pretending. No more letting people confuse manipulation with loyalty. The house still stands. The porch still creaks. The windows still catch the morning light. But everything inside it feels different now. Because now, when I walk through those rooms, I am not walking through the ruins of betrayal. I am walking through proof that I survived it. And that matters. It matters more than pride. More than gossip. More than family image. Because truth does not need a crowd. It only needs one brave person to hold it up. And that person was me. My name is Claire. They tried to throw me out. They tried to make me disappear. They tried to use my own family against me. But the papers were real. The evidence was real. The part that surprised me most was not the betrayal. It was what happened after. Because once the truth came out, I thought the storm would be over. I thought people would quietly accept that the house was mine, that the law was clear, and that I had every right to stay. But real life is never that clean. Some people do not stop when they are proven wrong. They get louder. They get meaner. They try to save their pride by damaging your peace. And that is exactly what my family tried to do next. At first, it was small things. A cold message. A passive-aggressive call. A rumor passed through someone who just wanted to check on me. Then came the real pressure. My brother started telling people I had turned against the family. My aunt said I had manipulated the property issue. My cousin acted like I had somehow tricked everyone into thinking the house was mine. It was almost laughable. Almost. Because they were speaking like the papers did not exist. Like the county records were made of smoke. Like my name on the deed was just some detail that could be ignored if they repeated their lies enough times. But lies only work when people are afraid to verify the truth. and I was done being afraid. So I did the one thing they never expected. I asked my attorney to help me prepare a formal notice. Not a warning, not a threat, a formal notice. It explained the ownership status of the house, confirmed that no one else had any legal right to demand possession, and made it clear that any further attempts to force me out would be treated seriously. When I signed it, my hand did not shake. That surprised me. A year ago, maybe even a few months ago, I think my hand would have trembled. But not that day. That day, I felt something steadier than fear. I felt settled. Because once you know the truth, you do not have to perform confidence. You can just stand in it. The notice was delivered. And after that, the calls got quieter. But silence from people like that is never the same as peace. It is usually just planning. So I stayed alert. I kept everything documented. Every message, every voicemail, every visit, every strange comment from anyone connected to the situation. I had learned that people who try to take your home often begin by trying to rewrite your reality. First, they say you are confused. Then they say you are emotional. Then they say you are selfish. Then they say you are the problem. And if you listen long enough, you can start to wonder whether they might be right. That is how good people lose ground. Not all at once. Slowly. A little guilt here. A little doubt there. A little exhaustion layered on top of old love. That is why I refused to let the story be told by them anymore. I knew I needed to tell my own version clearly. Not just to the lawyer. Not just to the authorities. But to myself. So one night I sat down with a notebook and wrote everything out from the beginning. How I saved. How I bought the house. How I paid every bill. How they began taking over piece by piece. How they used family pressure to make me feel small. How they tried to remove me. How I proved the ownership. How they folded when faced with the truth. I wrote it all down, page after page. And somewhere in the middle of that writing, I realized something powerful. I had stopped writing like a victim. I had started writing like a witness. That change mattered. Because a victim asks, why did this happen to me? But a witness says, this is what happened. This is what I know. This is what the truth is. That is where my strength lived now. In the facts. In the record. In the proof. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A local reporter contacted me. She had heard that there had been a family property dispute in the neighborhood, and she wanted to know whether I would be willing to speak about the legal side of it. I almost said no, not because I was ashamed, because I was tired. I did not want my pain turned into gossip. I did not want my family drama turned into entertainment. But then I thought about all the people who were pushed around in silence. All the women. All the quiet daughters. All the sons. All the relatives who are told to just keep the peace, while others steal their peace from them. And I realized maybe my story could help someone else recognize the patterns sooner than I did. So I agreed. Not to expose every private detail. Not to humiliate anyone. Just to share the truth. The reporter came with a calm voice and a respectful attitude. She did not push. She listened. And when I told her that I had bought the house with my own savings, that I had all the legal evidence, and that my family had tried to force me out anyway, she looked at me and said, "That is more common than people think." That made me pause. More common. That meant I was not alone. It meant there were others out there being pressured, dismissed, cornered, and manipulated in their own homes, their own families, their own lives. And if my story could remind even one person to keep their documents safe, then maybe all of this pain had a purpose. The piece was never dramatic. It was thoughtful, careful. It focused on property rights, family pressure, and why documentation matters. It did not name everyone involved. It did not turn my life into a spectacle. It simply told the truth. And the truth spread faster than I expected. Not because people loved the drama, though some probably did, but because people recognized themselves in it. I started receiving messages. Some were from strangers, some were from women, some were from older people who said they had been through similar situations. One message stayed with me. It came from a woman in another state, and she wrote, "I thought I was crazy for keeping all my papers. Reading your story made me feel like I was protecting myself the right way." I sat there for a long time after reading that, because that was exactly what I had needed to hear years earlier. That protecting yourself is not paranoia, it is wisdom. It is survival with a paper trail. The attention from the article also did something else. It made my family realize that the house story was no longer something they could twist behind closed doors. Now there was a record. Now there were eyes. Now there was a version of events that could not be buried under guilt and family pressure. My brother called after the article came out. He let it ring. Then he called again, and again. "Finally," I answered. His voice was different, less sharp, less certain. He started with, "So now you want to embarrass us publicly?" I took a breath and said, "I told the truth publicly. There is a difference." He snapped, "You made us look bad." I answered, "No, your actions did that." He was silent. Then he said, "You could have handled this inside the family." I almost laughed, but I did not. Instead, I said, "I tried that. Remember? For years." He had nothing to say to that, because he knew I was right. That was the thing about truth. It does not need to be loud to be painful. A single, honest sentence can undo years of excuses. He finally said, "We were under pressure too." I replied, "Pressure does not give anyone the right to steal my home." That line ended the call. He hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. I was not shaking. I was not crying. I was simply aware that this was another door closing behind me. And maybe it needed to. Because some doors are only kept open by pain. Months passed after that. The house became mine, in a way that went beyond paperwork. I began to live in it as if I was allowed to. That sounds strange, but anyone who has had to fight for their space understands. I had spent so long surviving in my own home that I had forgotten how to simply live there. So I started small. I cooked meals I liked. I played music in the kitchen. I opened windows in the morning and let the air move freely through the rooms. I bought a new rug for the hallway. I placed soft blankets on the couch. I planted flowers outside near the walkway. Little by little, I turned a battlefield into a home again. And in doing that, I healed more than I expected. There were still hard days. Of course there were. Healing does not erase memory. Sometimes I would catch myself remembering the old tension in the house. The anger, the whispers, the pressure. Sometimes I would hear a car outside and instinctively look up, wondering if it was them. Those habits did not disappear overnight, but they got quieter. And every time I felt the fear rising again, I reminded myself of the documents, the deed, the registration, the proof. It was not a hope. It was not a belief. It was a fact. That difference kept me grounded. One evening, I got an envelope in the mail. For a moment, I stared at it with suspicion. These days, I do not open unfamiliar letters without looking at them twice. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. Not a long one, just a few lines. She wrote that she had been thinking a lot, that she had started to understand how badly I had been treated, that she regretted not standing up for me sooner. And at the bottom she wrote, "You were always stronger than we gave you credit for." I sat with that note in my hand for a very long time, because it was not a perfect apology. It did not erase anything. It did not repair the damage instantly, but it was the first time she had admitted it plainly. That mattered. I did not cry right away. I just folded the note carefully and put it in the same folder as the deed. That folder had become something more than legal protection. It had become a record of my life. What I built. What I survived. What I refused to lose. A few days after that, my mother asked if she could visit again. This time, I said yes. When she came in, she looked nervous but quieter than before. She sat down, and for a while neither of us spoke. Then she looked at the flowers on the table and said, "It is peaceful here now." I nodded. "It is." She swallowed hard and said, "I think I was afraid of the truth for a long time." I looked at her. She continued, "It was easier to go along with everyone else than to admit what was happening to you." That was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from her in a long time. And although it did not fix everything, it opened a door. Not a big one, just enough for the truth to breathe. I said, "I needed you then." Her eyes filled, but she did not interrupt. I went on, "Not money, not excuses, not silence. I needed you to choose me." She nodded and whispered, "I know." That conversation did not make us close again. It did not erase the damage, but it changed something. It made the betrayal real in a way that could no longer be denied. Sometimes that is the first step toward healing. Not forgiveness, not reunion, recognition. The willingness to say, "Yes, that happened," and after that, the rest can slowly begin. As for my brother, he never fully apologized. Maybe he never will. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean out the garage. It had become one of those places where old things get stacked and forgotten. Boxes of decorations, unused furniture, broken items I kept meaning to throw away. As I worked, I found something I had not seen in years. A small notebook. It was one of my old saving journals. Back when I was still trying to buy the house, I used to write down every deposit, every overtime shift, every goal, and every sacrifice. I had forgotten all about it. I sat on the garage floor with that notebook in my lap and started flipping through the pages. There were lines in my own handwriting that made me stop and stare. "Do not give up. One more month. One more payment. Stay focused. It will be worth it." I read those pages slowly, and then I understood something that made my chest tighten. I'd been speaking to the future version of myself all along. The version that was supposed to survive this. The version sitting in that garage now. The version who had made it. I put the notebook back in my hands and held it like a treasure. Because in a way, it was. Not because it was old. Because it proved that I had once believed in myself before anyone else did. And that belief had carried me through. People talk a lot about strength like it comes all at once. Like one day you wake up and become powerful. But that is not what strength feels like. Strength is quiet. It is repetition. It is choosing yourself 10,000 times in a row, even when no one is clapping. It is paying attention when others are trying to distract you. It is keeping records when others are counting on your memory to fade. It is staying calm when someone wants you emotional. It is walking into your own house and remembering that no matter who shouted, no matter who lied, no matter who tried to intimidate you, the truth stayed standing. The truth always stayed standing. One evening, I received a message from my cousin. The same cousin who had once acted so confident, so certain, so ready to watch me leave. His message was shorter than I expected. He said, "I know I was wrong. I should have spoken up." I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no apology that could repair what happened completely. But there was honesty there. Late, but honest. I did not answer right away. I let it sit. Because some messages need space before they can be understood. The next day, I replied. I wrote, "I needed you then. I do not need excuses now. Learn from this." That was all. No anger, no long speech, just truth. And maybe that was the best kind of closure I could give. Not because it made us close again. It did not. But because it let me set the final line. I was no longer the one begging to be heard. I was the one deciding what happened next. A few weeks after that, I did something I had been putting off for years. I changed the nameplate outside the door. It had been old and faded for so long that I had stopped noticing it. When I finally replaced it, I stood on the porch for a moment and looked at the fresh letters. My name, clear. Sample. Mine. I know that sounds small, but to me, it was everything. It was not about vanity. It was about ownership. It was about being visible in the place I had built for myself. It was about saying, without words, that I was not temporary here. I lived there. I belonged there. And no one could rewrite that. That night, I made dinner and ate at the kitchen table with the windows open. The air was cool. The room was quiet. I could hear crickets outside and the soft hum of the refrigerator beside me. Nothing dramatic happened. No phone call. No confrontation. No surprise visit. Just peace. And after so much chaos, peace felt almost unreal. I looked around the kitchen and thought about everything those walls had witnessed. The planning, the fear, the betrayal, the proof, the victory, the healing. It had all happened right there, in the same room where I now sat eating a simple meal by myself. And I smiled, not because my life had become perfect. It had not. But because it had become honest. That was enough. The next Sunday, I invited Mrs. Carter over for tea. She brought cookies, as usual, and sat at the table with that kind of calm kindness that never asks for a return. She looked around the living room and said, "It feels good in here." I smiled. "It does." She sipped her tea and asked, "Do you think you will ever fully trust people again?" I thought about it carefully. Then I said, "Not the same way. But maybe that is not a bad thing." She nodded, and I added, "I think trust should be earned slowly. I used to hand it out too easily." She gave a small, knowing smile. "Yes," she said. "You did!" That made me laugh softly. Not because it was funny, because it was true. And sometimes truth is the kindest joke life tells you after you survive something hard.